This is Don Swartzgerber in Winona Lake, Indiana, and I'm with Donnie Pitchford in Carthage, Texas. And I ran across some of Donnie's work not too long ago, and we started corresponding a little bit, and he agreed to do this interview. This material is for my college class. I teach a visual narrative class. Donnie, if you don't mind, since so much of your work is based on the golden age of radio, I don't know that a lot of my students would know a lot about that.
I taught broadcast journalism and video technology, and that was in the unit. It was the history of radio, history of television. And that was in my classes, and so my students ended up knowing a lot about that, and we did an old-time radio show every week as a project. Basically, radio came into being officially around the year 1920, and in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and even 1950s, there were comedy shows on the radio. There were dramatic programs on the radio. If any of your students are seeing the old reruns on some of the channels like MeTV or what have you, some of the programs that were on television in the 50s and 60s grew out of the radio programs, like westerns. Gunsmoke was one of them. I can think of several others. The Lone Ranger, Superman. Of course, Superman came from comic books, but originally. But a lot of those things were old radio programs where you just listened. And so you had to use your imagination to fill in the pictures. Families would gather around huge radios or tabletop radios and listen. So, you know, if they couldn't afford to go to the movies back during the Great Depression or during World War II, most of them had a radio. They could listen and imagine and visualize what these characters looked like. So you had a lot of radio programs, well, like Lum and Abner. Lum and Abner was about two old fellows. They might have been in their 60s at the time, supposedly, on the show. And when the show started, they were being played by two guys who were in their late 20s. So it didn't matter what you looked like. You could be a 5'1" guy that weighed 98 pounds, but you might be playing Superman or something to that effect. So it was called theater of the mind by a lot of people. So that's what old-time radio was like. Music, news, drama, comedy, variety. It was like television, only it was strictly radio.
I spent a lot of time as a kid drawing, listening to Disney records. And in fact, one of the reasons I went to study animation was my imagination was at work listening to those records, Peter Pan and so on. I hadn't even seen the cartoons. And I actually, in some ways, I think I was disappointed when I actually saw the cartoons later. Because in my head, I had these visuals. Fever Began, Molly, Gunsmoke. Gunsmoke has so many episodes. Yeah. And the writing for Gunsmoke's unbelievable.
Yes.
I think the primary writer, I think, went to Harvard. I mean, he was very lettered, intelligent man, and it translates well into, you know, it's like Louis L'Amour. As a kid, we would turn the radio on late at night. We weren't allowed to listen to this, but it was some kind of chiller theater or inner sanctum or something, and we would listen to it, and it would scare us so bad that all of us boys would have to all pile in one room and sleep that because we were so scared.
Yeah. You mentioned Gunsmoke. The sound effects in Gunsmoke were incredible. You know, they worked diligently to get the best sounds. And when you were listening to that or to the Disney records, I had the good fortune of meeting and actually working with some of the people who were involved in those programs in their later life, which ran on radio from 1931 until 1954. And, you know, that's a long run, but the radio programs were popular, and a popular radio program had that momentum to continue for many years.
Not only are you a cartoonist, but you're also a cartoon voice. When I listen to your program, how many voices are you doing? You're having a cast.
Currently, there's a gentleman named Tim Hollis who is doing some of the voices. Some of the earlier ones, I was doing everything myself, but I've got a retired broadcasting professor who's doing the announcing. Another friend is narrating as a character named Dick Huddleston, who was from the radio show and who was also a real person in the early days of Lum and Abner. But there are several people. It just involved whichever the script is and when it was produced. When it started out, I was trying to do every voice in the cast because I didn't have anybody working with me. So, but I like having other people because I don't have to listen to it and say, no, that sounds like me again. You know, that's too much like me. That doesn't sound like the real guy. But Lum and Abner were two gentlemen named Chester Lauck and Norris Goff. They were known as Chet and Tuffy were their nicknames. And for most of the run of the show, they did every voice on the show. Each one specialized maybe in 3 different voices or characters. And sometimes they would bring in outside actors, but so that's what I'm trying to do now, is get some more people in there so it doesn't sound like the same person over and over.
So, you know, Donnie, I'm going to have to ask you to do this, but can you give us some voices?
Okay. Well, I'm not currently doing Lum, but I'll try to throw that one in there. If any of your students have heard of the old team Abbott and Costello, they would get words or phrases. Costello would misunderstand something and they would have a long discussion. Well, Lum and Abner did this too, and I don't know, they started in 1939, so you'd have to compare the history, but a lot of times Lum would come in and say something like, well, now, Abner, you know, you can't count your chickens before your eggs hatch.
Huh?
Abner would say.
What do you mean counting my... What did you say?
I said, you can't count your chickens till your eggs hatch.
Well, I better call up my woman Elizabeth and find out how many eggs she's got, 'cause I don't know what to expect.
Abner, I ain't talking about Elizabeth or her eggs.
Huh?
Oh, Granny's here comes Squire Skimp. I wonder what that varmint
Well,
wants.
now,
Gentlemen, how are my good friends today? Squire, will you get out? We don't want to talk to you.
yeah, Squire, go on, mind your business.
Well, Lum, I just came in to offer you a great deal on some stock in a brass mine. Yes, that's it, a brass mine. That's what's popular today. Get out of here, Squire.
Yeah, get on out of here.
There was another character that I liked a lot named Mousy Gray. And Mousy was very soft-spoken, and I don't even know if your microphone will pick this up, but Mousy would come in and say, Lum, I told my wife off last night. I just had enough of her. Well, Mousy, what did you say? I said, Gussie, shut your big fat mouth. Mousy, you didn't say that to big old Gussie, did you? I sure did, Lum. I sure did. Of course, she wasn't at home when I said it, but I felt a lot better. There were a lot of characters in the show. Some of them were based on real people in a real town in Arkansas, which was called Waters, Arkansas. And the show became so popular, the gentleman who was sort of the town leader, Dick Huddleston, who was also used as a character on the show, got a movement together and they changed the name of that community to Pine Ridge after the radio show. They did that in 1936, and that ceremony was broadcast nationally. So it was a down-home kind of show. If your students have seen things like the Andy Griffith Show, which is another old program that you and I would know, or the Beverly Hillbillies, very similar in context at times.
As an animation student, quite a few of my friends would practice voices, kind of assuming they might get a chance to jump in and do things. And I studied with Milt Neal that did Mickey Mouse voice at the time, Donald Duck, and so on. On Fieber McGee and Molly, William Thompson did Droopy, he did Mr. Smee. Just his voice is unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
I know Mel Blanc is celebrated, but there's some other really talented people.
Oh, yeah.
I would argue Fieber McGee and Molly, I don't care much for the show, but anytime Old Timer and Gildersleeve and all these other characters come in.
What was so great about radio, and of course Mel Blanc and a lot of these others started as radio voices and worked their way into animation, which is why we still hear them so much today when they rerun these old cartoons. And I wish I could have met Blanc. I never had a chance to do that. I met some other cartoon voice actors. Jerry Hausner was one who worked on the old Mr. Magoo series, you might remember. Dallas McKinnon, who did a lot of work for Disney, and Walter Lantz and Art Clokey. He was the voice of Gumby, and Dick Beals.
Do you have an opinion about the kind of movement away from cartoon voice specialist into just big name actors?
I don't really follow the business that much today because I'm more a historian, with broadcasting and animation, and really I focus on what I grew up with because that's what I enjoyed. But I have listened to some of the newer productions, especially with the Warner Brothers characters, and I'll hear Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck being voiced by someone else, and I'll say, "What did he say?" And it's as though they don't grasp the phrasing, the timing, and the enunciation that Mel Blanc would bring to those roles.
So I live in a town here, the home of Cocoa Wheats, and actually they brought Mel Blanc in to do a parrot in these kids' voices. And I don't know in terms of financially like the success of Cocoa Wheats, but there just seemed to be this, once he jumped in and was involved in it, it took their advertising just to a whole other level.
It's Cocoa!
It's Cocoa Wheats! It's Cocoa Wheats! Bird brain! Cocoa Wheats!
One of the things, Donnie, I think you do well is you navigate the slang. So when I read Pogo or The Yellow Kid, some of those older cartoons, they're so challenging to read. It feels like you've done a good job of just bringing enough in to kind of give it that nostalgia, but it doesn't get too cumbersome.
Some of it is having listened to the program because I got interested in it. I heard about Lum and Abner as a kid in the mid-'60s from my dad who grew up listening to it. And I liked the situation comedies, the corn coms or the rural situation comedies. And I thought, well, that sounds like something I would like. I didn't hear it first until I heard it in the 1970s. But really, when I started listening to it on a university radio station in 1980, when I heard the first example, and that was when I really started to follow it and at first I thought, this is kind of dull. What is this? But I recognized how they spoke because it sounded like going home and visiting uncles, and aunts and grandparents, because my dad was from Arkansas. My mother was from East Texas. So, I grew up sounding like a mixture of the two. And really the way Lum and Abner speak seems exaggerated, and to some extent it is, but not really, because I've heard people who speak exactly that way and use some of those same phrases and terms. So I try to use the things that we heard on the radio show, but I know what you mean. If you go overboard, it's difficult to read. It's like some of the early Crazy Cat comics by George Harriman. I have to really concentrate to decipher what Crazy is saying because I'm not familiar with, I'm not sure if it's a New Jersey or Brooklynese, or it's like reading mumbles in the Dick Tracy comic strip, if you've ever done that. It's tough. You have to look at it and say, now what is this guy saying? And you do run the risk of overdoing it. And I'm sure there are probably people who have looked at Lum and Abner, the comic strip, and have frowned and said, what is he saying? But I try to balance it the best I can. There are certain expressions they use, like I grannies and I doggies and I'll be dad blame and all these sort of things that are easy to pick out. And then other times, like the word it, sometimes they'll say hit ain't gonna work. Hit, H-I-T. And I worry sometimes when I use that if somebody's gonna say hit. What's he saying?
Lum and Abner, comic strip number 162, part 9 of the series Dynamite Lum. And now, let's see what's going on down in Pine Ridge. Lum is working out in his feed room turned gymnasium for his big fight with Cyclone Gordon, from which he hopes to win $100. Squire Skimp is advising the old fellow, who seems to be having a bit of trouble with the punching bag. Listen.
Yes, keep up the good work, Lum.
That blame thing hits back.
Champ, maybe it's time for some more road work.
All right, Squire. Here I go.
That's the way, Lum.
Run, champ! Look at him go, Grandpap.
I swan if he ain't a sight in that outfit.
That's right, Grandpap.
Looks like a pickled goose. Never knowed he was so skinny.
Yeah, his knees look like knots tied in a rope.
Them boxing gloves are dangling on his arms puts me in the mind of a water bucket on the end of a rope.
Well. Will Lum be ready for his fight by this time next week? Well, no. You see, something much different is about to happen to Lum and Abner. But don't worry, we'll get back to Dynamite Lum in 3 weeks.
Drama is life with the dull parts cut out, is what Alfred Hitchcock said. And it is interesting, like timing. In humor today, it's about being succinct and trimming out as much as possible. And it's interesting when you, like someone like Norm Macdonald, he actually flipped that, and he would get really wordy and make everyone uncomfortable because he wasn't getting to the joke quick enough, and we're not used to that today. Andy Griffith, that is part of the charm. There doesn't have to be a joke right away.
Even Lauck and Goff noted that their program was not loaded with joke after joke after joke. You know, it built on the storyline and the situations, and usually every 15-minute program would end with a little cliffhanger of some sort or a little gag at the end. And it even in the 1930s and 40s, it wasn't meant to be fast-paced. And I think where they made their mistake is where CBS said, look, you know, guys, we want you to try 30-minute situation comedy with a live orchestra and a live audience and some extra people, some extra stars and occasional guest stars or whatever. And so they ramped it up for that. And, you know, every few seconds Abner would have some zinger to something Lum would say. And it's like, why is Abner suddenly such a smart aleck, you know? And the listeners didn't buy it. It's like, this sounds like Lum and Abner cast in another program or in another universe. You know, who are all these weird... In fact, they would get letters saying, who are all those people in the Jot 'em Down store laughing? They were talking about the audience, because there were people that in those days who would hear something on radio and believe it was real. You know, they would hear the soap operas, and Nellie Johnson was dying in the hospital, and every day, every 15-minute soap opera, the people would be, you know, oh, poor Nellie. The doctors don't think she'll make it. And people would hang on those words, send get well cards to the radio station, you know, please tell us, is Nellie going to live? And they thought it was real. At the Lum and Abner Museum in Arkansas, this one gentleman he had tears in his eyes. He said, you know, I guess we were younger then, but I thought all this was real. I thought Lum and Abner were two real people. I thought Grandpappy Spears was someone else. I didn't know it was two guys. You know, he got an education about the show there, and he said, all that was fantasy.
Lum and Abner, comic strip number 169, chapter 16 of Dynamite Lum. And now, let's see what's going on down in Pine Ridge. Well, this is not only Friday the 13th, but also the night of the big fight in Pine Ridge. Dynamite Edwards enters the ring against Cyclone Gordon, the Montana Mauler, in an effort to win the $100 offered to any man who can stay in the ring 5 rounds with the heavyweight champion of Montana. As we look in on Pine Ridge, we find a large and excited crowd gathered in the lodge hall where the fight is being held. Abner Peabody, who is to give you a round-by-round description of the battle from the ringside over the telephone party line, is just ringing the phone. Take down your receivers and listen.
Howdy, everybody. They ain't no fire. This is Abner Peabody talking from the lodge hall. This description of the fight is brought to you by the Jot 'em Down store.
Mr. Abner, I've got to tell you...
Hush up, Cedric. I'm broadcasting. Get out. Oh, here comes Squire. Folks, Squire is about to introduce the box fighters.
Ladies and gentlemen, presenting a 5-round bout with a prize of $100.
Oh, dear, I hope Lum can do it. He sure looks scared.
In this corner, at 210 pounds, Cyclone Gordon, the Montana Mauler, the heavyweight champion of Montana.
Land sakes, he looks like a giant.
And in this corner, at 157 pounds, Dynamite Edwards, the Pine Ridge Panthers.
For pity's sakes, Lum's fainted.
Hello? Hello? Oh dear. It seems the party line connection has gone dead. Well, stay near the phone, friends. Hopefully, Abner will be back soon with more blow-by-blow action.
Donnie, I ran across one article that said Lum and Abner was improv, and then I ran across something else that talked about different scripts and so on.
When they started, it was as a lark, basically. They went to a local station in Hot Springs, Arkansas, KTHS, in April 1931, to be on a program that was, if I understand right, it was a fundraiser for victims of a flood. And local talent was invited to come on and perform. They just ad-libbed. They got there and saw that the wings were filled with all these acts that were imitating some other popular act at the time. And they said, we need to do something different. All these guys are doing what we wanted to do. So they said, well, what if we just imitate some of the folks out in Waters, Arkansas, or, some of the people we've encountered, because they lived in Mena, Arkansas, and their families were well-to-do. They were businessmen's sons, but they were also working, and they would work out in these small communities for their father's businesses. And they met a lot of people. They met Dick Huddleston, who ran a general store, and they got used to the humor of that small community, which was about 20 miles away. So they said, let's improv. They didn't use the word improv, but let's imitate those people. We can make something up. They've been doing this all their lives to entertain their friends. So they get up there, and the announcer says, I need a name. I need a name for your act. They didn't know what to say, and Chet Lauck said, okay, how about Lum? I'll be Lum. And Tuffy said, call me Abner. So the announcer said, now a visit with Lum and Abner. And that sounds like one of those Hollywood stories, but, everywhere it's been reported that that's what happened. It was just sort of off the cuff. So they did ad-lib. And the station manager said, you guys are well received. We've got a lot of phone calls, and in those days people would send, postcards. They want to hear you again. So they invited them back. Each week they came back. Finally, somebody said, you guys sound too much alike. So Abner decided, well, I'll raise the pitch of my voice. So he got up in here, sort of. And that gave them that difference. And also their heights. Lum was a tall guy, Abner was a short guy. So the little voice fit Abner. Then somehow or another they had an audition in Chicago. They were recommended to go audition for the NBC radio network. And they also auditioned for Quaker Oats Company, which became their first sponsor. And the network producer said, all right, guys, you go on at such and such time. Where's your script? They looked at each other. Our what? Well, you've got to have a written script. You can't just go on and ad-lib. Nobody does that. Okay, we'll bring it in tomorrow. They go back to the motel or the hotel where they're staying. They rent a typewriter. Like, how do we do this? So they were up through the night, for hours and hours, typing this script, throwing it away, typing it, throwing it away. Finally, they got something presentable, and they took it in, and, the network guy looked it over. Well, you're going to have to go on in a few minutes. Okay. And but they had to start writing scripts. So what they finally determined is they could write the script short, a little short, and Chet had a stopwatch, and they would time their last page. They knew exactly when they had to reach that last page. And if they came up to that point and they were short, either one of them was free to start ad-libbing. And whoever started the ad-lib had to come up with a way to get them back into the script. And that's how they did it. They would reach a certain point, say, "Oh, we're a little too early here." And they would say, "Hey, I just seen old so-and-so down the street," you know. They would throw something in and start ad-libbing and said it was amazing how they could do that on live network radio. Plus, they have to do it at least twice, once for the East Coast and once for the West Coast. It was both. It was scripted and it was ad-lib. It just depended on the situation.
Yeah, Lum and Abner had fewer sound effects, so probably would have been easier to improv versus the ones that have doors shutting.
Early on, they would do their own sound effects when they had the telephone. They did put in a door sound effect later, and in fact, that got them in trouble one time in 1945 when they had to broadcast. By that time, they were broadcasting from Hollywood because they were doing films, but they had to travel to Chicago and meet with the sponsors and that sort of thing. So I don't know if they had a portable door or one they weren't familiar with, but at some point, Grandpap was in the store with Abner. I don't remember the exact situation, but the door got yanked too hard to make the door effect. It fell over. You can hear this loud crash in the recording that exists, and they both got tickled and spent the rest of the program, breaking up at different times and trying to keep a straight face. So, live radio had its had its perils.
Lum and Abner, comic strip number 170, chapter 17 of Dynamite Lum. And now, let's see what's going on down in Pine Ridge. Well, Abner was just reporting to us from the Lodge Hall as the big boxing match between Dynamite Lum and Cyclone Gordon was about to get underway. Lum fainted just as Squire Skimp introduced him. Oh, there's the fire alarm ring. We'd better pick up the receiver and listen.
Folks, this is Abner again. Lum's conscientious now. The fight started. Cyclone's raced out of his corner to the middle of the ring. Here comes Lum. Cyclone's dancing all around Lum. Lum's standing there with his arms hanging down to his side. He's backing up now. Now Lum's swinging his arms. But he ain't close enough to Cyclone to hit him. Uh-oh, Cyclone pasted Lum once in. I doggos, it must have made Lum mad. He hit Cyclone. He did. Hit him right up against the jaw. Now Cyclone's got Lum backed up against the ropes. He hit him with his right. Oh, hit him with his left. Oh my goodness, he's just pounding the daylights out of Lum. Lum's got both gloves up to his face. Cyclone's still hitting him, but it don't appear to be hurting Lum none. Cyclone's backing off now. Oh, Lum's wading into him. Watch him go. He's chasing Cyclone over in his corner. Got him backed up against the ropes. He's... Uh-oh. Cyclone's knocked him halfway across the ring. Lum's just standing there. I believe he's addled. Oh, my goodness, he's fell to his knees. Lum, get up. Oh, my goodness, don't go to sleep out there, Lum. He's laying down now. Wait a minute, Squire's counting.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Hey, the bell saved him, Abner. If he can come to himself and get back out there, well, he's done stayed one round longer than I figured he would.
Well, Abner hung up again, but don't worry, folks. I'm sure he'll ring us up on the party line again next time.
You decide that you would like to contribute your artistic talent to this tradition of these Lum and Abner stories. Walk us through that process. How did you contact the estate or the family? What does that look like?
I taught for several years, and I was able to, at one point I knew it was time to leave that. I needed to do other things. I wanted to be a cartoonist. See, this was 2010 when I left the education job. I thought, okay, I've got a pension. I can experiment with other things. I did some paintings. I did a magazine cover, some other work. And there was a gentleman in Arkansas who contacted me to do an interview. He was starting an online newspaper. So First Arkansas News published this article, and it was well received because there's still, Arkansas has a Lum and Abner museum. Mena, Arkansas has an annual Lum and Abner festival, so the characters are remembered. I was thinking, you know, what I've always wanted to do is work as a cartoonist, and so I proposed the idea to this editor. His name was Ethan Nobles. I said, you're forming this online newspaper. Have you thought about comic strips? He thought, well, yeah, I'd like to do something. What do you have in mind? And I said, this is Arkansas, where you're publishing. Why not a Lum and Abner comic strip? He thought, is that possible? And I said, well, let me find out. So I had worked for many years as an officer of a group called the National Lum and Abner Society, and we were an old-time radio historical society, and that's where I met a lot of the actors and the writers and people that had worked on Lum and Abner. And so I contacted the son of Chester Lauck, who was Chet Lauck Jr. I said, I'd like to see some samples. You know, I'd like to talk to you about the financial arrangements. I think I did 4 weeks of samples, and Chet called back and said, I don't like this, I don't like that, I do like this. We worked it out, and in June of 2011 rather, we premiered the strip in First Arkansas News, and then we sold it to some of the Arkansas newspapers, and also to a publication called Today's Grocer, whose editor is a big fan, and that's a national publication. And so we're online, and we got that rolling. It's once a week. It's a Sunday comic strip. And it's, I guess, you know, the trendy term for that is retro, if retro can be a trendy term. You know, it's an older style. It's what a friend of mine calls the classic style of comics. I was contacted by some friends who operate an internet broadcasting station called Yesterday USA. And 3 of these men are blind. And they were telling me, okay, we're really happy about this idea. We like Lum and Abner. And maybe we'll get somebody to read it to us. And I thought, well, what can we do about that? And so that's when I suggested to Ethan, I said, can we include an audio clip with every strip? My first thought is, well, maybe I can just describe the strip, you know, tell the story, so to speak. And I thought, well, we used to do recreations of the Lum and Abner shows at the radio conventions of the National Lum and Abner Society, and it developed into what we're doing now with character voices and music and sound effects and so forth. So that's how we got it all rolling.
There is a tradition of comic strips being read in old-time news broadcasts.
Mm-hmm.
So that was done, which I find that absolutely fascinating, that that was a tradition that, you know, they would just grab a newspaper and read the word balloons and describe the structures. So,
I know Mayor LaGuardia did that at one time in New York when there was a newspaper strike, and that was a pretty famous incident. And then there was a radio show called The Comic Weekly Man, who was one man who, I think he did all the voices, who would go through and describe certain comic strips each week. And then some of the strips were turned into radio programs. I know there was a Little Abner, which is not related to Lum and Abner, although it's rural humor. But there was a Little Abner radio show based on the comic strip. There was Dick Tracy. There was Superman. I'm sure there are many more I'm leaving out, but there were several. And then there were radio programs that were turned into comic strips, such as The Lone Ranger. There is a tradition, you're right.
originally, when you submitted the comic strips, they were particular. And I think about how how everybody has a different worldview, different
Right.
politics. Are you in a situation now where you have more flexibility with what you say?
That was the only time that Chet contested anything or suggested anything, was early on. Once it got started, I rarely heard from him. He seemed to be happy with it. He was concerned at first because I had a strip in which Lum was really on Abner's case, and he was afraid I would portray, that was his dad I was portraying, that I was going to portray him as always angry or looking sinister or whatever. And I said, no, I said, this is just for now. You know, he's a little ticked off at Abner because it happened in the show a lot. Abner would do something and Lum would get mad, or vice versa. You know, I said, that's just the opening situation to get the ball rolling. One of the heavies is a character named Snake Hogan. And I started accidentally drawing him to look a little too much like Bluto in Popeye. And that was pointed out, and then I was advised by someone who worked for King Features, you know, you may want to tone that look down a little bit. It's starting to look like Bluto. You don't want the King lawyers to come after you. And I said, oh, okay.
You clearly have a strong interest in preserving the original. When you go on Audible or Hoopla, I think you were instrumental in making sure some of that material is available to the public, that they can go and...
To an extent, yes.
Yeah.
There are many others contributed to that. In fact, we, the National Lum and Abner Society, that includes a fellow named Tim Hollis, who also does some of the voices, and Sam Brown, who plays Dick Huddleston on the comic strip, were instrumental, Sam primarily, in locating the original collection of what's called transcription discs, which these were 16-inch recording.
Lum and Abner, comic strip number 171, chapter 18 of Dynamite Lum. And now, let's see what's going on down in Pine Ridge. Well, Abner has been using the Pine Ridge party line to report to us from the lodge hall as Dynamite Lum and Cyclone Gordon go at it in the boxing ring. In round one, Lum tried his best but was knocked to the floor, only to be saved by the bell. We're waiting now for... Well, there's the fire alarm ring. It must be time to resume. Let's pick up the receiver and listen.
Howdy, folks. This is Abner again on the party line back over here at the Lodge Hall, reporting on the big fight between Dynamite Lum Edwards and Cyclone Gordon. Yeah, they got old Lum back on his feet now. Hi, doggies. He made a run for Cyclone. They had to grab him and push him back in his corner. Well, good for him. Good for Lum. He's fighting all over the ring. They can't stop him. Run over there and ring the gong, Grandpap, while Lum's fighting so good. Hi, doggies, folks, I believe old Lum's out of his head. He's fighting all over the ring. Squire Skip's trying to stop him. He pasted old Squire One right in the face. Knocked him flat at his back. Here they go again. Squire's up on his feet now. Cyclone's coming out of his corner. Aye, doggies. Old Lum's tying into him. Hit him with his right. Oh, my goodness. Hit him again with his left. He's swinging them arms like a windmill. Oh, my goodness. He knocked Cyclone down. And get on over there and start counting, Squire. Squire's shoving Lum back in his corner. Cyclone's laying right in the middle of the ring. I believe he knocked him out. Hooray for Lum! Hooray for Lum!
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Count faster, Squire.
7, 8, 9, 10.
I can't believe it myself, but Lum knocked him out. Lum's the champion. Oh, I doggies. Wait a minute. I'll try to get him over here. I'll call you right back, folks.
Friends, can you believe it? Dynamite Lum, the champ.
A lot of students have a strong interest in developing out their own characters.
Mm-hmm.
And wanting to animate or doing graphic novels, sequential art with it. And I try to talk to them about the commercial side of things, of how so often you get hired to do whatever, strawberry shortcake. You don't really, sometimes you can pick, but sometimes you're just paying bills. And
Right, sure.
and so it's interesting because as you have moved into retirement, and you have more time to work on these projects of your own,
Right.
you've actually chosen a franchise rather than just develop your own characters. So walk us through
Right.
that journey of because you probably had some of your own ideas.
The characters that I developed when I was a kid growing up, I mean, I knew when I left teaching, I think I was 52 or so. I knew then, I said, this stuff will never sell. So I'm not going to break my heart trying to go back and revive these characters that I used to do, because I would look at what's coming out now, and other than rebooting old characters, that have been around for years, which drives me nuts. The kids probably think, oh, this is great. But, I prefer the original concepts. I knew that what I did as a kid wasn't going to sell. The kids in my class, let's say in 4th and 5th grade or 7th grade, let me read what you've done, They would read it and laugh and say, oh, this is good. Yeah, you got some more? And so that was my audience. But I knew I wasn't going to sell anything that I had come up with at that time. And Lum and Abner was something I'd always enjoyed. And suddenly here was this opportunity, so it just seemed natural. And, it's really easy to start thinking of them as my characters, even though I know they're not. I have put some of my own characters, or I've created new characters to go into the strip, which has been fun. I try to keep them in a similar style as to what was on the radio show, because the radio show would have new characters from time to time, or guest actors who would portray characters who had not existed before. So I try to stay open to that, and it really wasn't a contest. It wasn't a struggle. And, if I have time, I can still produce things with the characters I grew up writing and drawing just for fun.
I'm working with students who are paying a lot of money to major in art, and they're looking at this as a career. Is this more a labor of love, or can you generate a reasonable amount of income from something like this?
I mean, I'm only in a few newspapers and online. I have online sponsors that buy ads and that sort of thing. So obviously we're not looking at a wealth generating project. It's a goodwill generation. It's I've got some dedicated fans, dedicated readers, listeners on Yesterday USA. So it's making folks happy, and I'm certainly not getting wealthy doing it. So it's somewhere in between. Of course, I've done freelance work for other publishers, other editors, and that pays better. I, for 2 years, worked as a sculptor, assisting a veteran sculptor, which really generated a lot more income. That was a blessing there. And it would be great if Lum and Abner suddenly popped up in about 50 more newspapers. That would really be nice, but I don't think it's going to happen, and I'm not worried about it. I'm not a salesperson. I spent the first 3 years, trying to really sell the strip to as many papers as possible. But as it is, I managed to qualify for the National Cartoonist Society, which was a major goal ever since I was a kid. And I would see Sheldon Mayer have on there's an old comic book called Sugar and Spike about two little babies. And he would always sign his name on the cover or on the splash of the story and put those initials NCS. And I found out that was National Cartoonist Society. And then I learned that other cartoonists were members of that, and I thought, boy, I'd like to be a member of that. And so, I qualified for it, even though I'm not making the big money like Jim Davis or some of those cartoonists. But, I enjoy it, and it's something. I always remember what a cartoonist named Hy Eisman told me. Hy is 94 years old, and he still does the Popeye Sunday strip to this day. Longtime teacher from the Joe Kubert School. And he told me, he said, when he was 5 years old, he knew this is what he wanted to do. And he said he would do this even if he was starving, because he said he had the fire in the belly. You know, I've always remembered him saying that. He had that desire to be a cartoonist. And to me, that's what it is. It just took me longer to get back to it because I had to make a living as a teacher and as back when I was working in graphic arts.
Hy was one of my instructors because I attended the Kubert School.
Did you?
Yeah,
That's
and
great. Yeah.
Well, this is the sad part, is it was a bit, he was a brilliant teacher, but it was a bit of a waste of his talent. I took a lettering class because he did a little bit of that. At the time, he was working on Archie comics.
Mm-hmm.
He did a sketch for me one time and wrote, work really hard and you could be unemployed,
Yeah.
dozens of times like I am, or something like that. But, I mean, he was very, very good instructor, but it would have been nice to have him for a comic strip class or something like that. But at the time, I was an animator. I didn't think I ever wanted to draw a word balloon. So,
Okay. Yeah, Hy, I met him through the Popeye fan club. In 1997, he was their guest in Chester, Illinois. And, of course, I had read Hy's work growing up. I would see it in the Sunday comics in Little Iodine, and I knew that name. And now, in looking back, I realize that I've seen his work far more than I knew, because he did so much work at Dell, and he even did romance comics at Charlton. He did everything. He ghosted so many artists. He was King Feature's favorite ghost, I think, for years, when someone would need someone to fill in. And that was one thing I wanted to do in, let's see, the Kubert School opened in, was it 76? Somewhere in there, 1976. That's the year I graduated high school, and I started hearing about it, and I kept thinking, man, I'd like to go there. I'd like to take classes there. But I'm in East Texas, and that was in New Jersey, and I couldn't work it out. Unfortunately, I never had anyone advising me where to go to school, and as it turned out, I just did what I could afford. I went to a local junior college and then a fairly local university, and decided, okay, if I don't get in, says I'm going to try to teach. I'll teach art, high school art or junior college art. I'll do that maybe a couple of years, And I thought, that'll be it. But then I sidestepped into this broadcast journalism thing and video technology courses. And we had a very successful program here in Carthage, Texas. And before I knew it, I had done that for 25 years here. So
what advice would you have for my students that are interested in a career? What if they wanted to go for it and they wanted to make a living?
I think really all I can speak to is the basic learning to draw and learning to tell stories visually. And, you can do that very low tech. I know that, and I still do a lot of my work traditionally. I still use pencil and paper, pen and ink, brush and ink, and that sort of thing. I do some digital work, but I would say the more you can actually physically draw and learn to create shapes and learn to create the illusion of depth, whether it's a realistic depiction or whether it's, a cartooned or exaggerated pose or whatever it is, I think that's the key, is to get started. And if you don't love that process of learning to draw, if you don't discipline yourself to draw anything you see, so that you hold it up and say, what is this? I say, oh, that's a horse, If you don't really learn to draw and love learning to draw and love telling stories, you probably should look for something else. But as far as the commercial aspects of it, that business has changed so much. One thing that George Wildman, who is another Popeye cartoonist, who was a mentor to me, I would write letters to him and get advice when he was drawing Popeye and when he was an editor. He would say, seek out other cartoonists or other artists and get their advice, and look into what we were talking about, programs that will teach you these different things. You may learn things you don't like. You may take courses that are tedious, like you mentioned, lettering. That's one thing I avoided. I never took a lettering class. And I thought, well, I won't need this. I just want to do cartoon lettering. How stupid. Because I've since gotten jobs where it demanded hand lettering. The editor said, no, I don't want a computer font. I want real hand lettering. And I want you to emulate a certain style, and that's not easy. So take advantage of anything you can learn.
We have such strong feelings of, I know for sure what I'm going to do in a couple years. And that sense of humility is such a big deal. When you look at Heisman's work, his ability to draw Tom and Jerry, to draw a cat running, and to draw all the other characters, Archie, whatever, he's not locked into a style because he's such a good artist. And a good artist can adapt. They could go from Wonder Woman to Tom and Jerry to SpongeBob and put it in perspective, like you're saying, and draw cars and vehicles. And it may take them a day to kind of adapt to a style, but a good artist can do that. And I remember in art school, there were a few students that they came in and said, well, this is my style. And they just wanted to go through the training and like come out doing the same kind of drawings they did going in. And it didn't work out real well for him. So,
of course, I wasn't able to go to the Kubert School, so I went to State Junior College, State University, and at the time I didn't appreciate some of the things I was doing, but I know there was a life drawing class, and I know a lot of students. I don't want to. I hate that. Oh man, we have to draw the muscles, we have to draw the bones, we have to draw from a live model, and I thought that was great. Because I thought, what better preparation if you're going to draw comics to learn anatomy and to learn the movement of the human body and how the weight affects the pose and vice versa. So, I wouldn't frown at any of that. Right now I wish I'd had more traditional painting classes than what I had. Some watercolor, had some acrylic painting, but I never had traditional painting classes. And a lot of people now will say, you don't need that, everything's digital, what do you want that for? But I really think you need a well-rounded education in art. And one thing that I took that I thought I'll never need this was a ceramics class. And one of the early assignments was to do a bust of your self-portrait. We had to do our self-portrait. And boy, I remember students coming in there with things that looked like they had grown up in a garden, and you wanted to hack it down because it looked like an alien being emerging from. It's like, that's you, So we had some pretty good laughs, but I worked very hard on mine and did pretty well, and that helped me more than anything because I had to turn around years later, 40 years later, and assist a sculptor. And you had to do realistic faces, heads, hands, all kinds of things. And if I hadn't had that experience learning to see, a lot of it is learning to see, as you may tell your students, and they may look at you a little oddly, but there's a lot to that. There's a lot to hand-eye coordination and learning negative shapes and positive shapes and geometry and all the things, in the basic drawing classes that people frown and take deep breaths and think, oh, this is tedious, this is boring. Well, maybe it's not really boring, maybe it's challenging. And I think you need to look at it in that sense. Of course, this is me coming back 40 some odd years later saying all these things because I've been through it. And, it's tough. I know it's tough for young students now who sit there and say, that's an old guy. We don't do it that way anymore. What's he talking about? He doesn't know what he's talking about. So, yeah, okay, feel that way if you want to. But, a few years down the road, you may come back and think, something about what he said makes sense. So, okay. If I can say anything that makes a little sense today, then then that's good.
Lum and Abner comic strip. My favorite way, if you are visually impaired, go to Audible and process the storytelling. It's really interesting. My favorite way to process it has been to look at the comic strip as I play the audio on your website. Is really a unique and fun experience. Is just to follow along as it's being described, and then hear the voice acting. How many have you done?
Close to 550 at this point. It's been weekly, so it's been just over about 10 and a half years. So we're coming up on 550 somewhere in early 2022, I think. But it is weekly. There are times I wish I had a daily strip, to propel the story or to fill in the gaps, but I don't. But I do continue it. It is a continued storyline, week to week, similar to the old radio shows. And sometimes it gets a little wordy. So sometimes I have to edit a lot of the dialogue out of the actual art. And then those who listen to the audio get the extra information. So as far as new projects, I don't really, right now I'm just maintaining what I'm doing. I should have some new material coming up in a magazine called Charlton Spotlight, where we've completed a story that was written many years ago by Nick Cuddy, illustrated by Joe Staton, if you're familiar with Joe. And I did the coloring on that story. With the most recent one, I was about 10 minutes ahead. Since I'm not, for print, I'm about 6 weeks ahead, which is about average. But the online strips come out very quickly, and I try to get 2 or 3 weeks ahead, and here lately I wasn't able to do that, and so Saturday morning was one of those pencil, ink, color post days. But I try to get as far ahead as I can on the audio, and we have a large audience of folks who are blind, who that's the way they keep up with the Lum and Abner comic strip. They know no other version. So that's why in the audio you'll hear descriptions of things that you see in the strip, and you might wonder, why is he telling me that? Because I can see it here. Well, that's for the benefit of the blind people, or for those who only listen to it on Yesterday USA or wherever you might hear it. But
Donnie Pitchford, the comic strip artist of Lum and Abner, the new comic strip. Make sure you check out his work, and I will put links to his material so that you could follow him. Thank you, Donnie, for your time.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor, and I hope that something we've talked about will resonate with your students. And I'd like to hear from some of them. If they love what I do, fine. If they hate what I do, I'd like to hear that too. So anything I can do to help.
Sounds good. Thank you, Donnie.
Thank you.